Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today, be part of the 10th anniversary conference of the BDD Foundation, and to talk about one of our studies focusing on perceptual biases. So where was this topic 10 years ago? I was about to start my PhD, and I think BDD researchers were busy with the question whether or how perceptual biases might explain or maintain BDD symptoms. What is a perceptual bias, first of all? We've heard about it in Jamie Füssner's talk a bit. So it's a specific form of an intentional bias, as it describes a bias towards selective, mostly visual attention to appearance-related information. And if a person has a perceptual bias, it means that this person prioritizes perceptual information, for example, appearance-related information, during perceptual processing and further processing. Or in other words, that the person more often processes perceptual information or information in a more detailed manner. There are other cognitive biases as well, and those are relevant in BDD and also for other mental disorders. So why was this question about perceptual biases in BDD important, first of all? Because, as you know, individuals with BDD perceive flaws or defects in their physical appearance which are not or only slightly visible for others. And this indicates some kind of mismatch between the physical appearance and the internal body representation. As you know, in BDD it's most often related to the face, or in muscle dysmorphia it's related to the experience of their own body as too lean or not muscular enough. So can perceptual biases contribute to this key feature of BDD? What we knew 10 years ago is mostly deriving from eye tracking studies using free viewing paradigms. And in those studies, the researchers were interested in the gazing patterns of individuals with BDD or in individuals with other mental disorders or mentally healthy individuals. And those studies quite consistently found a selective visual attention bias for certain facial features, namely that individuals with BDD reveal more of a negative bias. They shift their visual attention more often to the areas they don't like in their own face and also in others' faces. And not all, but some studies also showed an absence of a positive bias. That means individuals with BDD appear to neglect their self-rated, more positive features. And cognitive behavioral models of BDD contribute to explain how this perceptual bias maintains BDD symptoms. We have heard about those models earlier in the keynote, for example, by Sabine Wilhelm, and a bit simplified, the idea is that a perceptual bias or selective visual attention causes distressing feelings, and these lead to rituals, and one of the most common rituals is mirror gazing or other gazing rituals, appearance comparison, for example, and that means that this maintains even more selected visual information caused by these rituals. So we know that selective visual attention towards the perceived flaws is present in clinical BDD, but is it possible that a perceptual bias also precedes the onset of BDD, or that it can be a kind of a risk factor in BDD? And to answer this question, we need another approach, namely models that describe processes involved in how we experience our bodies, so our body representations. And to this end, my colleagues and me we developed a conceptual framework on body representations consisting of two parts, a structural and a process model. The structural model, for the structural model, we propose 3 dimensions in which we can differentiate different aspects of body representation, including the cognitive affective body image, how someone feels about his body, for example, but also the perceptual body image or the body schema. And we also included different sensory modalities, so visual information, but also proprioceptive information that we have heard about a bit in Jamie Füssner's talk, or tactile information. So this structural model aims to help with an overview which aspects of body representations might be relevant in different disorders. And the process model, on the other hand, helps to get insight, for example, into specific processes as the effects of perceptual biases on, for example, appearance satisfaction. For example, regarding the question, what happens if an individual without BDD imitates BDD-like perceptual biases? That would be focusing on this part of the model. And we use this process model to develop our experimental studies. I would like to go in a bit more detail for one of the studies that we conducted on this question, and we were interested in different perceptual biases in non-clinical individuals when looking at their own face. First, during free viewing, we used this condition to have a comparison for the other eye tracking studies, and then a positive bias induction where the individuals were only allowed to look at their most liked parts, and a negative bias where the individuals were only allowed to look at the least liked facial areas, which is more closely related to the BDD-like gazing behaviors. So that means for this study, we used individualized bias inductions for each participant. We investigated 36 non-clinical individuals with, on average, low BDD symptoms using a 3x2 experimental within subjects design, and we used the eye tracker here, other than in the previous eye tracking studies, to control the gazing behavior and not to investigate the gazing patterns, which was the main research questions in the free viewing paradigms. And we were interested in the effect on aspects of the cognitive affective body image, namely appearance satisfaction and attractiveness ratings. During the first appointment, we provided study information, and the participants provided informed consent. We took a standardized photograph, and the participants provided a ratings of their most liked to least liked facial parts to define the areas of interest, AOIs, for the bias induction. And the second appointment started with the baseline assessment of this self-report measures, followed by the 3 bias inductions, or 2 bias inductions in free viewing, each ending with the post-assessment on the cognitive affective body image aspects. Here you see the items, the state items the participants answered, but I think more interesting is the bias induction. So we took the standardized photograph of each participant, and then adapted a mask that you can see here in picture B and C. And then for the positive bias induction, the participants were only allowed to look at the 2 most liked parts, and for the negative bias induction, the participants were only allowed to look at the least liked parts. And the picture of their own photograph was only visible as long as they stayed within these allowed areas, and it disappeared as soon as they looked somewhere else. So here you find, you see an example where it's only allowed to look at the eyes and the jaw area. And we used a high-resolution eye tracker, so this was more responsive than it appears here, and the red dot imitates the eye movements. What did we find during the free viewing? We were interested if we could replicate the gazing patterns from previous eye tracking studies, and that was the case. So the non-clinical participants in our study mostly prioritized the most liked parts, 67%, and you see only 2.8% already revealed a negative bias. So probably those individuals might be at risk for the development of further BDD symptoms or other body image distortions. And did this gazing behavior also affect the appearance satisfaction ratings? What you will see here is in the first row the effects on the most liked facial areas, second row least liked areas, and then two aspects of the cognitive affective body image, facial appearance satisfaction and attractiveness evaluation. We only see one significant effect, namely a decrease in appearance satisfaction. And as I mentioned earlier, during the free viewing, most of the participants focused on the most liked parts. So we assumed that this might lead to an increase in appearance satisfaction, but the contrary was what we found. We found a decrease. During the positive bias induction, we see a very similar pattern, also significant decrease in appearance satisfaction from pre to post. And during the negative bias induction, we assumed that the appearance satisfaction would decrease because the individuals only focused on the least liked parts. But that wasn't the case for the least liked areas. Again, we only find a decrease for the most liked areas. So with regard to our research questions on perceptual biases, we found that individuals without BDD, so non-clinical individuals, showed a preference for gazing at their most liked features in their own face, which is in line with the results from previous studies. We didn't find any indication for a specific perceptual bias effect, for example, a protective factor with increasing appearance satisfaction, or in form of a risk factor with decreasing appearance satisfaction when focusing on least liked parts. Instead, we found a more general effect, negative effect of gazing, irrespective of the specific gazing strategy, namely that it negatively affects the evaluation of the most liked facial areas. So, what could be future directions in this line of research? We are still using this approach and optimizing the experimental design to see if those effects are robust. It might be important to look at other perceptual biases as well, for example, including tactile information. PhD student in our project, Janan Savashan, is presenting a poster on this study. And from a prevention perspective, it might be important to investigate these processes in individuals that are more at risk, so in more vulnerable individuals, for example, with subclinical BDD. And maybe a few years from now, if we are able to disentangle those processes involved in the perceptual biases, we might be able to develop individualized, personalized treatments or prevention approaches that help, so using those gazing strategies that help to reduce perceptual biases or to prevent those perceptual biases. This brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to ask questions.